You are in completely uncharted waters. The story is not the rise of China. The story is the relentless pace at which China has been rising. If you do not stop keeping this country on the slow boil of polarization, I am afraid you are heading up a very dangerous street. Now everybody is scrambling, and therefore nobody really knows whether the guarantees of security and stability that they had taken for granted are any longer valid. It has succeeded beyond the wildest imagination of its progenitors. It represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. You cannot fight the battles of tomorrow with the mindsets of the past.
Manish Tewari, welcome to DeKoder, and thank you for speaking to us. I wanted to start by asking you that a world adrift, it's a fairly sort of, pessimistic view and slightly worrying view. What made you think that this was the title, and what were some key parameters you looked at to say it is a world adrift?
So thank you very much for doing this and inviting me. Way back in 2016, I was serving as a distinguished senior fellow with a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the Atlantic Council. So my term there overlapped with President Donald Trump's first term in office. And I could see, even at that point in time, that there is a massive power vacuum which is going to open up. Because the United States was exhausted after 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They wanted to withdraw from their global commitments. America was desperately in need of a infrastructural renewal. There was a lot of skepticism about why the US is doing all this heavy lifting. So it was very evident even back then that there is going to be a flux in global affairs. And then COVID happened. And the kind of subnational responses which really characterized the first couple of months of COVID-19, when things were so uncertain, only reinforced the belief that institutions of global governance had perhaps become completely redundant. Then came the war or the aggression of Russia on Ukraine. You already had a very aggressive China coinciding with President Xi Jinping's assumption of office way back in 2012, 2013. Then the Middle East happened with the Hamas terror attack and Israel's disproportionate response. Then we had our own kinetic exchange with Pakistan. And then, of course, what was happening in East Asia between Thailand and Cambodia. Coupled with that were the trade wars, which Trump decided to unleash in its second term. So by about the beginning of 2023, it was very clear that if at all there was a post-World War II order, that had completely collapsed. And that is from where the title "A World Adrift" comes from.
So, it's interesting. You just mentioned, and when I was reading, I was making notes. You did say that a recurring sentiment in the United States was that they were exhausted. But A, they got Trump back. That's, that was one. And B, I was just reading something that his approval ratings have just plummeted and all. But there still seems to be a lot of support for whether it's his tariff policies. Every time he doesn't like something, the country is levied. What happened in Venezuela, Greenland. Where do you think it is going in terms of the US, which you also said was kind of the monitor, looking at the whole world, when the monitor itself is just going completely to take from your book, Adrift, what happens to the world order?
So essentially, if you were to rewind back a little, there are four fundamental impulses to US foreign policy. So they are the Wilsonians and the Hamiltonians, who in varying degrees believe that the United States should be very proactively engaged with the world, including trying to spread its own ideals, if there are any left now, to the world. And then you had the two other schools, essentially the Jacksonians, and one more school of foreign policy thought, which believes that the US should not do the heavy lifting abroad. And there's always been this inherent tension. But since the end of the Second World War, it is the Wilsonians who actually prevailed, and the US built this entire architecture of military and economic alliances. But, Iraq and then Afghanistan actually demonstrated the limits of undertaking those global commitments. And therefore, pretty much, the US handed back Afghanistan to the very same Taliban, from whom they had taken it in 2001 after spending about $3 trillion and lots of blood and treasure. So, therefore, it's not as if the United States came to this position all of a sudden. As I was saying, that there had been a debate within their strategic community for a very long time, that why are we really doing this? And then when President Trump comes in his second term, which is also actually a demonstration in many ways of that exhaustion, because President Biden had a far more internationalist disposition, the support that he extended to Ukraine in the face of the Russian aggression. And in many ways, there was perhaps a yearning that the US should disengage. But then Trump, during his second term, is neither Wilsonian nor Hamiltonian. He is only Trumponian. Right? So therefore, on one hand, you have this impulse of converting the United States into a fortress by levying tariffs on everybody. Then you have the incursion in Venezuela. You have the claims on Greenland. You want to turn Gaza into a Rivera, and he's constituted this International Board of Peace. So these are, frankly, impulses which go against the very fundamental grain of established foreign policy schools of thought, which have held the field now going back almost 3 centuries. So in many ways, you are in completely uncharted waters.
Nobody knows what's coming next.
Yes. So, and that's why everybody is hedging. So from Australia all the way up to Japan, then the Middle East and Europe, which had become complacent because of the US security umbrella post the Second World War. Now everybody is scrambling, and therefore nobody really knows whether the guarantees of security and stability that they had taken for granted are any longer valid, and we are no exception to that.
So, it's interesting because there was a bit that you said, you actually quoted Antonio Gramsci, where you called it the age of monsters, right? The old world is dying, all of that. And as I was reading that, I thought it's very interesting because you have all these superpowers, Russia and America, and what they are doing. Then you have countries like India, and then you have smaller countries, right? Now, where does everybody fit in? What do they do? You spoke about hedging bets. Let's just take India for an example. How do we hedge our bets? What is it that if you were at the forefront of this, what would you have us do?
So essentially, you see, modern strategic thought is essentially a European construct. And there are three foundational pillars of that. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and then the concept of raison d'etre, which was conceptualized by Cardinal Richelieu, that every nation acts in its own best interest, and therefore in acting in its own best interest, it creates a kind of stability, which kind of holds the world together. And then there was Hugo Grotius, The Balance of Power, which actually what played out in Europe in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, with Britain really being the pivot, which would lean on the side of the weaker powers to keep the balance in continental Europe. So in many senses of the word, you are really going back to these two foundational concepts, which is raison d'etre, which is, to answer your question, every nation is now acting in what it perceives is its best national or strategic interest, and thinking that this would create a balance in some ways. However, the next concept of balance of power, that has not really emerged, because with the hegemon behaving so erratically, obviously there has to be a counterweight. But there is no balance of power at this point in time, because of the simple reason that the United States outspends its next country in line by about 8 times when it comes to defense spending. Right? So therefore, the gap between China, which is the second largest defense spender in the world, and the United States is almost 5:1, if not 8:1. I mean, the US spends about 2 trillion, China does about 400 million or something, 400 billion. So therefore, there is a huge power differential. Now, where does that leave middle powers like India? Middle powers like India, I think, are really grappling to preserve whatever strategic autonomy they have in order to see that they can firewall it. So these trade deals that you're seeing, the one which happened with EU, and EU actually, or the Europeans also sail in the same boat, because as middle powers, with the US security guarantee now almost non-existent, I mean, it's anybody's guess, were any European power, which is a signatory to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, were they to invoke Article 5, would actually US step up to the plate? Is $1 million question. And most Europeans privately would tell you that they do not think that would happen. So therefore, there is now this quest to try and preserve the space that you have, and number 2, build middle power alliances.
Please go ahead.
To see that if a balance of power can emerge.
Are we going to see many more trade blocs or alliances outside of the US? There was a time that almost nothing could be done without America. Are we going to see many more of these?
Well, that's precisely what is happening. In fact, you see, the process had started a long time back. For example, the BRICS. BRICS was basically an impulse, though it was an acronym coined by a consulting firm, which sounded very attractive and jazzy to try and promote a report. But then BRICS took a life of its own, and similarly in other parts of the world, people started coming together, having these minilaterals. For example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, though it's an anti-terror started as an anti-terror organization, but expanded its ambit. So this all started happening in the early 2000s itself, after the 9/11 attacks, when the US's hegemony as a hyperpower was challenged very decisively by a non-state actor. And after President Trump came in for his second term, this has acquired an urgency like never before. And now you have the Prime Minister of Canada actually trying to hedge bets by getting into some kind of a modus vivendi with China.
Yeah.
Right? Something which, of course, there was always trade between Canada and China, lots of Chinese in Canada, but these kind of overt overtures is really this attempt to try and create that balance against what I earlier said is a very erratic hegemon.
So tell me, in your book, you also spoke about saying that our autonomy is rooted in our internal cohesion and pluralism. But as you know, we all know the state our country is in, there is depolarization on many fronts. Is that a possibility? Do you see that, what you're speaking about of, India as a nation coming together? Is that even a possibility now?
That's precisely the worry. That's precisely what the worry is. You see, where do India's major internal security challenges lie? They either lie in the northwest, right? So you've had Punjab, which was at the receiving end of this whole Pakistani template of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts going back to 1980, because they have been revanchist ever since the creation of Bangladesh. And then you had Jammu and Kashmir after that. You've had insurgencies in the northeast going back all the way to the time that we became independent and we became a republic. And you've had the challenge of left-wing extremism in the heart of India, in central India. Those essentially are your three fundamental internal security challenges. Now, when you look at the northeast and you look at the northwest, that is where the substantive bulk of our minorities reside. And given the fact that the world is today in a state of flux and in a state of drift, if you do not walk that extra mile and build the social cohesion that we require at this point in time, you leave yourself very vulnerable. Because in addition to external challenges, if you are going to let internal challenges or internal situations also fester, Manipur being the classical example, then I'm afraid I really worry for us. You see, the Imperial British used treaties in order to keep the northwest and the northeastern part of India calm and tranquil. You've used constitutional articles because the Imperial British were looking at frontiers, right? So they were not looking at fixed boundaries. But as a nation, when you look at fixed boundaries, so you've used these constitutional guarantees to incorporate mainstream people, amalgamate them. When you renege on a constitutional guarantee, right, howsoever you may say that this is a one-off, it has a ripple effect. And that's why I say that given the fact that the world is perhaps going to remain in a churn, and it may even take decades before some form of a global order will emerge again, and what that form and shape will be, no one knows. If you do not consolidate yourself internally, you do not sort out your contradictions, you do not stop keeping this country on the slow boil of polarization, I am afraid you are heading up a very dangerous street.
So I want to talk to you about China and our relationship with China and where that's going. But before that, because, we just spoke about India, I do want to get your sense. We have a mini general election coming up later this year. There is an SIR going on. There is delimitation, which has happened in Assam. I just wanted to get your views on it in terms of SIR firstly, and where do you see that going? Good, bad, ugly?
Well, the special intensive revision has unfortunately degenerated into the biggest disenfranchisement exercise. When I led the debate on electoral reforms from the opposition benches in the winter session of Parliament, I have very categorically and unequivocally said that the Election Commission has no legal or constitutional sanction to conduct a statewide SIR or much less a nationwide SIR, because the provisions of the Constitution, read with the Representation of People's Act, gave the Election Commission a mandate to intervene in a constituency or a part of a constituency if there is an aberration, and that too for reasons to be recorded in writing and made public. So this fundamental question that where does this authority to conduct an SIR come from has never really been adjudicated. I mean, there are multiple challenges which are pending in the Supreme Court, but this foundational question, whether the Election Commission has the authority to conduct these statewide SIRs or these nationwide SIRs, has still not been decided, and this has created a lot of turbulence in the ground. I mean, if you have former chiefs of the Indian Armed Forces having to prove
their identity.
You have senior citizens who are 90 plus having to go and, prove. And I don't understand the basis of using the 2003 electoral roll. Essentially, is the Election Commission trying to insinuate that every election which was held after 2003 was held on a defective electoral roll? Frankly, I think the Supreme Court needs to answer this fundamental question definitively one way or the other, and then we can take it from there.
But Mr. Tewari, do you think our judiciary is going to step up? Because that's a whole other conversation.
I think the manner in which the responses of the apex court have been very calibrated when it comes to the question of SIR. After all, it's the apex court which has repeatedly ordered that lists should be made public. People should have the right to furnish objections. Even in the case of West Bengal, they've actually ruled that please put up the lists of those people who are to be deleted, at the panchayat level. So they are restraining the rather restless impulses of the Election Commission. But I do think that at some point in time, the court must, adjudicate on this fundamental question also.
Let's hope it's before, major elections take place. I want to go back to the book and where you speak about China and the relentless rise of China. And I did want to ask about India's relationship with our neighbor and how we should navigate. I mean, we've sort of had a difficult relationship at times. The recent report saying we're trying to sort of, make up. Where do you see this going?
So herein lies the conundrum that the story is not the rise of China. The story is the relentless pace at which China has been rising, now going back to 1979. And by the time India celebrates its centenary of independence and China celebrates 100 years of communist rule, the power differential would have widened even more exponentially than it is currently. And for that, you really need to go back into history. You see, India attained its independence from a pacifist freedom struggle. China came to be a one-party state as a consequence of a very fratricidal civil war between the communists and the nationalists, and the communists and the nationalists coming together to fight the Japanese during the Second World War. So they basically became what they are from a very militaristic ethos. And I think therein lies the distinction in the approaches of the two countries to problems which really have now been befuddling the relationship going back 7 decades. Till the time our leadership and our strategic thinkers do not really wrap their heads around the fact that the Chinese come from a very different position than what we do, to be able to, craft appropriate responses, I think would be difficult and has proven to be difficult. Now look at the last 5 years. So you had COVID-19 and China did not allow a discussion on COVID-19 in the March of 2020 because it held the rotating presidency of the United Nations Security Council. It is only when a smaller nation assumed the presidency that you had a discussion even on COVID-19 in the UN Security Council, which should have been its first priority, given that after almost 100 years, you've had this kind of global pandemic. Then, while COVID-19 was raging, you had the Chinese intrusions into Indian territory in the April and May of 2020. I mean, who would have thought that at a point in time when the priority would be of saving people and keeping populations insulated, the Chinese would really be doing this? And then comes the paradox. So you've had this tense standoff on the border for 4 years, and the India-China trade numbers kept rising year after year, year after year, and the balance of trade being decisively, or if not heavily, shifted in favor of China. Right? So this is the fundamental contradiction of the relationship. And even now, the government, so you've had these partial disengagement agreements. Government says that they are able to patrol all the points which they were patrolling before April, May 2020. But the fundamental question, has status quo ante as of April, May 2020 been restored on the line of actual control, has not been answered by the government definitively. There's this whole question of buffer zones. Are these buffer zones temporary? Are these buffer zones going to be become permanent? Most of those buffer zones, if one goes by publicly available reports, seem to lie in what is our perception of the line of actual control. And then you've got the sudden warming up to China because of the difficulties that we are having with the United States of America. And I think, a knee-jerk swing of the pendulum does not help India's national interest in any manner.
Can't live with them, can't live without them. Okay, I'm going to sort of end this interview because this is going to be an interview on Instagram as well. I want some short, punchy answers from you for Gen Z. Okay, so if a Gen Z reader was to, you had to tell a Gen Z person about the book in 30 seconds, what is the one hard truth they need to know about the world?
The one hard truth they need to know about the world is that technology has completely changed the battlefield. So therefore, you cannot fight the battles of tomorrow with the mindsets of the past. There has been a complete revolution in military affairs. And if you are interested in military affairs, or if you, like me, were the reader of Commando comics when we were growing up, there are chapters in this book you'll find interesting.
Okay. So you've warned about the weaponization of grievances via social media. Do you think that social media is currently the biggest threat to stability of democracies in the world, in South Asia?
If I can take a minute to answer this. You see, the internet, was the most audacious experiment in anarchy. And it has succeeded beyond the wildest imagination of its progenitors. It represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before in the history of humankind has so much power concurrently resided on so many fingertips. So therefore there is more data which is churned out every day today than from the dawn of civilization to the turn of the 21st century. So you have a tale of two civilizations. A brick and mortar civilization that took 5,000 years in evolution, and a virtual civilization which is now currently evolving. And the future of humankind lies at the intersection of these two civilizations. So social media is both, I think, the greatest empowerer and the greatest anarchist. So question is, where do you find the balance? I am not a votary of those who call social media unsocial media, because I think it has put a lot of power in the hands of people. Question is, how wisely do you use that power?
Okay, my final question. Do you think the winners of tomorrow are those who will control social media?
The winners of tomorrow are those who today are on the cutting edge of the fourth industrial revolution. AI, genomics, robotics, the Internet of Things, it's going to impact the future of work. It's going to impact the future of leisure. So therefore, if you lose the race, and that is what I worry for India, that if you lag behind in the fourth industrial revolution technologies, then I'm afraid you're kind of done.
On that very optimistic, bright note, Manish Tewari, thank you so much for speaking to DeKoder. And the book is called A World Adrift. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry,
Thanks.
your tea got
No,
cold.
that's all right.